The Divided Kingdom. Understanding your inner psychology. The war you didn't know you were fighting. Why is it that no matter how many self-help books we read, no matter how many personality tests we take, and no matter how deeply we journal, there's still a part of us that feels like an imposter? We achieve, we love, we build, but something inside whispers, this isn't all of you. Here's a truth that might rattle your sense of identity. Over 80% of people live entirely dominated by only one aspect of their psyche. The rest, emotions, instincts, intuitions, even logic, are locked in the dungeon, unheard and unruled. They don't disappear. They revolt. And that revolt? It shows up in broken relationships, unexplainable anxiety, impulsive regrets, and a haunting emptiness that no success can silence. But what if all your chaos, your self-sabotage, your inner critics, weren't failures, but factions in a civil war? Not between good and evil, but between four ancient powers inside your mind. Welcome to the Divided Kingdom, the hidden map Carl Jung uncovered when he dared to ask not just who we are, but why we break. Today, I'll show you a version of Jung's psychology that doesn't sound like a lecture. It feels like a legend. Because this isn't a theory, it's a mirror, one that reveals your exiled twin, the tyrant function that blinds you, the war that breaks you, and the path back to a united self. So, buckle in, because by the end of this journey, you won't just understand your mind. You'll remember who you were before the kingdom divided. Chapter 1, The Exiled Twin, Why You're Not Who You Think You Are. What if the version of you living your life is only half the truth? What if the other half, the part you silence, avoid, reject, is the very piece you've been searching for? You didn't become you by choice. You became you by approval. As a child, you learned quickly what parts of yourself were acceptable. Maybe it was your thinking, praised for logic, organization, and detachment. Or maybe it was your feeling, nurtured, expressive, emotionally connected. Or perhaps your intuitive side was celebrated, your wild ideas, your dreams, your foresight. But no matter which part got the crown, one thing remained true. Something else was quietly sent into exile. Jung called this the formation of type, but not as a box, as a survival strategy. You see, the psyche isn't a monolith. It's a kingdom, a castle with many rooms. But early in life, you're told which room is safe, which lord you should serve. The rest, shut off. Not destroyed, but forgotten, repressed. Like a twin brother locked in the basement, whispering through the cracks of your thoughts. It shows up in strange ways. That burst of rage when someone challenges your beliefs. That random shame that floods you during success. That fear of people who act too differently. They are not just triggers. They're signals from the part of you you've buried alive. Let's tell a story. A girl grows up in a home that rewards silence and intellect. Her emotions are too much. So she learns to analyze, to outthink her pain. She becomes brilliant, respected, but every relationship ends the same. Emotional distance, numbness, cold. Until one night, she dreams of a girl in a red dress, crying in a locked room. It's her, the part she locked away. That story isn't fiction, it's millions of people, maybe even you. The exiled twin isn't evil, it's neglected. And what we neglect, we project. We see it in others, we hate it, we fear it. But until you meet your twin, you will never know peace. You'll keep chasing wholeness in pieces. Have you ever felt like you're too much for some people and not enough for others? Have you ever sensed there's a part of you that's deeper, wilder, more alive, but you can't reach it? That's the twin calling, and the first step is to stop pretending it's not there. Because the exiled part of you is not gone, it's waiting, and soon it won't wait quietly. Chapter 2. The Four Lords of the Mind. Meet the powers that rule you. Inside the castle of your psyche, four powerful lords stand at the throne room door, each one with their own vision for how you should live. One whispers logic, one sings in feelings, one grounds you in what can be touched, one pulls you toward what can't be explained. These are not random personality quirks. They are ancient energies, mental dominions Jung called the four functions: thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition. Most people serve only one lord, not because they chose to, but because one came first and silenced the rest. If you lead with logic, you may mock emotion. If you're led by instinct, you may ignore imagination. But here's the twist. No function is superior. Each one holds a quarter of the map. Serve only one, and you're ruling blind. Imagine this, a kingdom where only the minister of logic has power. He builds perfect systems, cold efficiencies. But he can't feel the people suffering, or the artist queen, full of passion, color, love. But she forgets to plan, to structure, to survive. Or the scout of senses, practical, grounded, reliable, but deaf to the dreams whispering from beyond. And finally, the oracle of intuition, visionary, prophetic, but often lost in fog. Now imagine each trying to rule alone. The result? Collapse, confusion, rebellion. That's your mind, when only one function is allowed to rule. Your dominant function is the one you trust most, your mental first language, but the others still live in you, unheard. They speak softly at first, through body tension, strange dreams, misjudgments. But when they're ignored too long, they shout, through breakdowns, explosions, crises, and you wonder, why am I sabotaging myself? You're not. They are, the lords you silenced. Case in point, Elon Musk. A man driven by vision and logic, brilliant, relentless. But when emotion and people enter the arena, his blind spots flare. Or Robin Williams, a whirlwind of feeling and intuition, but his inner structure collapsed when darkness came. These aren't personality flaws. They're typological imbalances. Jung saw this not as pathology, but as prophecy. Your imbalance is your invitation. Your inferior function is not your enemy. It's your awakening. So, let me ask you, who rules your mind right now? Is it the thinker who needs to control, the feeler who seeks harmony, the sensor who clings to what's real, or the intuitive who lives in the future? And which lord have you ignored? Because until you call a council, you're not leading, you're ruled, and the one you silence the most may soon rise in rebellion. Chapter 3. The Tyrant Function. When strength becomes sabotage. The greatest threat to your psyche is your greatest strength. That's the paradox no one sees coming. The part of you you're most proud of, the razor-sharp intellect, the deep empathy, the lightning intuition, or the grounded practicality, can become a tyrant. Not because it's bad, but because it's alone. Jung warned us, when one function dominates without challenge, it distorts reality. It starts to believe it's the only truth. Like a king surrounded only by loyalists, your dominant function builds an echo chamber. And when no one dares to question it, it begins to destroy from within. Let's make this real. Imagine a man who leads with logic, brilliant strategist, cold in crisis. He prides himself on facts, dismisses emotions, avoids intuition. He builds a company from the ground up, but over time, his employees fear him. His relationships dry up. He burns out. He doesn't understand why. After all, he's doing everything right. But his strength became too loud. It drowned out the whispers of his neglected parts. That man was Steve Jobs before his rebirth. Jobs was once so dominated by vision and control that he alienated teams, got ousted from Apple, and spiraled. It wasn't until exile humbled him that his shadow, the parts he ignored, were integrated. When he returned to Apple, he came back not as tyrant, but as king with counsel. Your dominant function is like a spotlight. It lights your path, but it also blinds you to what's outside its beam. The more you rely on it, the more you become vulnerable to the things it cannot see. For the feeling type, over-identification with others' emotions becomes people-pleasing and emotional instability. For the thinking type, emotional repression becomes isolation. For the intuitive, fantasy becomes avoidance. For the sensor, practicality becomes paralysis. It's not just burnout, it's betrayal from within. Have you ever found yourself stuck in patterns that once helped you, but now hurt you? Have you ever felt like your go-to way of handling life just stopped working? That's the tyrant function speaking. But it doesn't have to rule forever. Once you recognize it, you can invite the other functions back to the table. You can create inner democracy, not just rule by one, but rule by all. Because the part of you you lean on most should be a guide, not a god. And if you think this function is strong now, wait until you meet the one you've buried. Chapter 4. The Shadow Chamber. Your hidden power hates you. There's a room inside your mind you never visit. Not because it's locked, but because you pretend it doesn't exist. Jung called it the shadow. Not because it's evil, but because it hides behind you when you face the light. But the longer you ignore it, the louder it screams. Your shadow is built from everything you had to reject in order to survive. If you were taught to be strong, your weakness was shamed, so you buried it. If you were praised for order, your chaos was punished, so you suppressed it. But that part didn't die. It mutated. It waits, it watches, and sometimes it lashes out. We see this in everyday life. The kindest people explode. The rational thinker becomes irrational in love. The peacemaker turns passive-aggressive. It's not that these people changed. It's that the shadow momentarily took the wheel. And here's the truth. The more you repress it, the more it possesses you. Let's go deeper. A man grows up in a home that rewards strength and logic. He becomes hyper-successful, a master planner, but he avoids emotion. One night, his partner accuses him of being cold. He scoffs. Then, out of nowhere, he snaps. Tears, rage, confusion. He doesn't understand it, but he doesn't need to. His shadow just got tired of waiting. This isn't weakness, it's imbalance. The neglected part of the psyche doesn't ask for revenge. It asks for reunion. In modern terms, think about burnout, addiction, anxiety. They're not random malfunctions. They're the shadow crying out. They're the inner chamber, leaking smoke into the halls of your daily life. Jung didn't say to fight the shadow. He said to integrate it. That means listening. That means acknowledging the feelings, impulses, desires you'd rather not admit. It's not indulgence, it's wholeness. And here's the twist. Your greatest genius might be hidden inside your shadow. That anger you suppress, it's boundaries in disguise. That fear, a warning system. That part of you that wants to run away from everything, maybe it sees a prison you won't admit you're in. Have you ever caught yourself doing the opposite of who you think you are? Saying something brutal even though you're kind? Wanting something irrational even though you're logical? That's the shadow, not sabotaging you, trying to save you. But it can't help you if it stays chained, and it won't stay quiet forever. Because behind that locked chamber isn't a monster, it's a map. Chapter 5. The Invisible Compass. How your type distorts reality. You don't see the world as it is. You see it as your dominant function lets you. That's not an insult. It's how the psyche survives, by filtering chaos into something familiar. But what happens when your compass doesn't point north? Only comfortable? Each psychological type carries its own lens. Thinking types navigate with logic. They value what makes sense. Feeling types move through meaning, what connects or disconnects them emotionally. Sensing types rely on direct experience, what they can see, touch, measure. Intuitive types scan for patterns, what could be rather than what is. These are not quirks, these are filters, maps. And here's the terrifying truth. Your map is not the territory. Jung saw it clearly. People don't argue over truth, they argue over type. The thinker mocks the feeler for being irrational. The feeler scorns the thinker for being heartless. The sensor thinks the intuitive is lost in space. The intuitive sees the sensor as chained to the dirt. But nobody's wrong. They're just lost in their own compass. Let's illustrate this. Imagine 4 people walk into a forest. The sensing type says, "Look at the moss. It's growing thicker here. That means there's water." The intuitive says, "Something about this place feels ancient, like we're not alone." The thinking type says, "Based on the sun's position, we should be heading northeast." The feeling type says, "I don't like the energy here. It feels heavy." Who's right? All of them. But if one dominates, the group may walk in circles, fall into a ravine, or miss a treasure buried underfoot. This is you, every day, making decisions with one compass while ignoring the others. Modern example? Think of corporate decisions driven only by data, ignoring gut instinct or emotional fallout. Or artists drowning in feelings but never executing. Or spiritual seekers getting visions but forgetting rent is due. These aren't personality failures, they're compass collapses. The solution isn't to destroy your compass, it's to consult the others. Have you ever made a choice that looked perfect on paper, but felt wrong in your body? Or avoided an opportunity because it didn't make sense, only to regret it later when your intuition had been right all along? Your dominant function isn't lying, but it is limited. It sees clearly in one direction and leaves the rest in shadow. Integration means learning to turn the compass, not throw it away. Because sometimes the thing you need most lies in the place your function refuses to look. And if you think one compass isn't enough, just wait until you realize why other people trigger you so much. Chapter 6. The Mirror Enemy. Why others trigger you. There's a strange law of the psyche. The people you despise most often carry the part of yourself you buried long ago. That loud, chaotic coworker, maybe they echo the spontaneity you sacrificed for control. That cold, emotionless partner, Perhaps they reflect the logic you never allowed yourself to embrace. What you reject in others often reveals what you've rejected in yourself. Jung called this projection when the contents of your shadow are cast onto others like a movie on a blank screen. But this isn't just a psychological theory. It's a spiritual boomerang. Every judgment, every irritation, every disproportionate reaction is not just about them. It's about you. Here's how it works. You bury a trait, say anger. You decide nice people don't get angry, so you push it down. But anger doesn't disappear. It disguises. It leaks out as sarcasm, resentment, passive aggression. Then one day, you meet someone who owns their rage openly, and you hate them. You call them toxic, unstable, but deep down, your body remembers. I used to be like that, before I was told I couldn't be. Story time. A therapist once worked with a client, a deeply compassionate woman who couldn't stand arrogant people. Every time she met someone confident, her skin crawled. Through shadow work, they uncovered a hidden memory. As a child, she was told not to brag when she succeeded. Her confidence was shamed, so she replaced it with humility. But deep down, her buried pride was starving, and every confident person she met became the enemy. Projection isn't the problem, it's the portal, because the very people you judge might be carrying the key to your wholeness. Even your romantic attractions follow this logic. Ever wonder why you keep falling for the same wrong type? It's your shadow, trying to reintroduce you to the part you left behind. The moment you realize this, life changes. Triggers become teachers, enemies become mirrors, and you stop asking, why are they like that? And start asking, what part of me is reacting? Have you ever overreacted to someone, then later wondered, why did that bother me so much? That's not just emotion, that's an echo. And once you stop trying to change the people who trigger you and start listening to what they awaken in you, the real transformation begins. But to truly face the shadow in others, you'll need to confront what happens when society chooses a type and declares it the only truth. Chapter 7. The Psychic Revolt. When society forces you to break. You were not born broken. You were bent, shaped by a world that favors certain types, while quietly silencing the rest. Society doesn't just reward performance, it rewards preference. The logical are called rational, the emotional, irrational. The practical are praised as realistic, while the intuitive are dismissed as dreamers. But what happens when your true nature doesn't fit the mold? You either betray yourself or break. Carl Jung's own life was a perfect storm of this revolt. Early in his career, he was hailed as the heir to Freud, a rising star of science and psychoanalysis. But inside, a war raged. Freud prized reason and reductionism. Everything was about sex, instinct, the conscious mind. Jung, he felt the pull of symbols, myths, dreams, the numinous. He couldn't shrink the soul into Freud's box. And so, he snapped. Jung didn't rebel out of ambition. He broke because the structure he was in could no longer hold his truth. And when he broke, he wandered, had visions, conversations with archetypes. He descended into what some called madness. But in that madness, he met himself, not the socially approved doctor, but the full psyche, mythical, messy, multidimensional. This revolt doesn't just happen to mystics and geniuses. It happens in quiet ways. The artist who becomes an accountant, the healer who becomes a lawyer, the child who senses spirits, but is told to stop imagining things. Over time, the pressure to conform bends the psyche into unnatural shapes, and one day, it cracks. Modern society loves the efficient, the productive, the repeatable. But what if your psyche is none of those things? What if your gift is in chaos or beauty or intuition? People who don't fit are often labeled broken, but maybe they're not broken. Maybe they're resisting. Have you ever felt like you were playing a role that never quite fit, even though everyone applauded? Have you ever felt exhausted from being who you're supposed to be? That's not laziness, that's revolt, your type rising against the tyranny of acceptance. But rebellion without reflection leads to ruin. Jung didn't just reject Freud. He transmuted the tension into a new path, one that included both reason and symbol. That's your invitation. Because the world may try to define your value by what you produce, but your soul defines it by what you become. And once you accept that society may be wrong about your truth, you open the door to the part you once considered useless, but may in fact be your hidden crown. Chapter 8. The Hidden Type. your superpower in disguise. Every hero has a hidden power, but in real life, it rarely shows up with lightning bolts or magical swords. It shows up in awkward silences, in traits you feel ashamed of, in moments when you say, "That's just not me." What if I told you? That's where your superpower lives. Jung called it the inferior function, the opposite of your dominant one. It's clumsy, slow, sometimes embarrassing. If you're a thinker, it's emotion. If you're a feeler, it's logic. If you're a sensor, it's intuition. If you're intuitive, it's the body, the present, the tangible. You avoid it because you're bad at it. But here's the twist. That's exactly why it's powerful. Think of your psyche like a kingdom again. You've ruled with one lord your whole life. But there's a wild prince in the woods, the inferior function. Untrained, uncivilized, but full of raw, untapped strength. If you ignore him, he becomes a threat. But if you train him, he becomes the warrior you never knew you needed. Let's take an example. An introverted artist spends her life immersed in imagination. She's wildly creative, deeply intuitive, but she struggles with structure. Her projects stay unfinished. Her life feels chaotic. Then one day she forces herself to build systems, time blocking, task management. At first, it feels unnatural, but eventually her inferior sensing function awakens. She doesn't become a machine, but she finishes her book. Her dream gets delivered. This happens across disciplines. The logical executive who learns empathy becomes a transformational leader. The intuitive mystic who trains focus becomes a revolutionary. The emotional empath who learns boundaries becomes unshakable. Your weakness, embraced, becomes your weapon. Why? Because the inferior function connects you to what you most lack and most need. It humbles you, grounds you, completes you, and in doing so, it opens the gate to integration. But don't expect it to feel good. Awakening your hidden type is like learning to write with your non-dominant hand. Messy, frustrating, vulnerable. That's why most people never try. They double down on their strengths until those strengths become cages. Have you ever felt a strange pull towards something you're not good at, but secretly admire in others? That's not coincidence. That's the whisper of your hidden type. And once you hear it, you can begin the training. Not to become someone else, but to become someone whole. But this journey isn't just about power, it's about healing. And that healing begins when something strange happens. You start acting out of character, and it feels right. Chapter 9. The Inner Integration. What Healing Feels Like. Healing doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like confusion, like doing something that's not you and realizing it still feels right. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about reclaiming the parts of you disowned and finding they always belonged. When the inferior function begins to awaken, integration starts. And here's the paradox. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like vulnerability. Imagine a lifelong thinker who suddenly breaks down crying during a moment of beauty, or a devout feeler who calmly makes a cold, calculated decision and doesn't feel guilty. These aren't betrayals of type. They are evolutions of self. But this evolution isn't linear. It's laced with discomfort. You may question yourself. You may backslide. That's not failure. It's the psyche reorganizing. Old patterns loosen. New pathways emerge. Picture this. A man who's always been known as the Rock. Logical, composed, reliable. One day he admits to his wife that he's scared. He says the words out loud. "I don't have it all figured out." And instead of breaking, something clicks. His wife doesn't pull away. She leans in. Because real strength is not perfection. It's integration. Integration is when your inner council starts to collaborate, when the lords of logic, emotion, sensing, and intuition sit at the same table. Decisions become richer, reactions become slower, but wiser. Life stops feeling like performance and starts feeling like presence. And yet, the world may not applaud this. Your friends may say you've changed. Your coworkers may not understand. That's because they knew the mask, not the person. And integration isn't about being more liked. It's about being more you. Think of integration like a color wheel. Your dominant function is red, but healing isn't about becoming blue. It's about blending until new shades appear. Until you are no longer just a type, but a full spectrum. Have you ever surprised yourself, said something that felt uncharacteristic, but exactly right? That wasn't a fluke. That was you, the whole you, emerging from behind the wall of type. And when that happens often enough, something else changes. You stop needing to fix yourself because you realize You were never broken, just incomplete. And yet, integration is not the end, because the parts you've reclaimed still need a leader, a conscious self that can command without domination, a ruler who knows how to listen. But to become that ruler, you'll need to meet the warrior you once tried to kill. Chapter 10. The Shadow General. The warrior you tried to kill. Inside you lives a warrior, not the polished kind you show to the world, but the raw, raging, untamed force you tried to bury. You called it weakness, or sin, or not me. But deep down, you feared it because you knew it had power, real power. And if you dared to listen, it could turn the tide. This warrior is your shadow function when trained, trusted, and invited back into the kingdom. Once exiled, now it returns, not as a threat, but as a general. History is filled with those who rose not because they followed rules, but because they reconciled their darkness. Leonardo da Vinci was not balanced. He was obsessive, contradictory, and chaotic. But he channeled that chaos into genius. Virginia Woolf wrote with piercing intuition, but also faced haunting psychological storms. Jung himself journeyed into visions and archetypes many feared were madness. They didn't escape the shadow. They followed it home. See, the problem isn't that you have a dark side. It's that you treat it like an enemy. But what if that anger was leadership? That fear, intuition, that shame, a call to realignment? Imagine a woman who always played the caretaker, soft-spoken, always agreeable, until one day she snaps. But instead of retreating, she listens. She learns to say no, to protect her space, and suddenly her life reorganizes. Not because she became mean, but because her shadow gained rank. This isn't about becoming reckless. It's about becoming real. A conscious self chooses when the warrior leads, and when it stands down. You don't let the general rule the kingdom, but you let them fight when the gates are under siege. The shadow, when integrated, becomes precision, depth, protection. It makes you whole, but it also makes you dangerous, in the best way. Have you ever looked back on a moment when you finally stood your ground, said what needed to be said, and realized you weren't out of control, you were finally in command? That wasn't you losing it. That was the shadow stepping forward with a sword you'd forgotten you owned. But the general cannot fight alone. They need a kingdom behind them, an inner structure that supports, not suppresses. And when the inner kingdom finally unites under conscious rule, peace doesn't just return, it reigns. But before we crown the king, there's one final vision you need to see. Chapter 11. The United Kingdom Within. When all of you comes home. Integration isn't a feeling, it's a shift, a new architecture of being. The war that once raged inside you, the voices pulling in opposite directions, the silent mutinies, the rogue emotions, doesn't disappear. It becomes a council. And for the first time, the self sits at the center, not as a dictator, but as a sovereign. This is what Jung meant by individuation. Not becoming someone else, but becoming yourself, entirely. It's when the thinker consults the feeler, when the sensor grounds the intuitive, when the exiled function walks back into the throne room, not in chains, but in celebration. And no one notices, because integration doesn't show up with fanfare. It shows up when you make a decision you once would have avoided, and it feels easy. It shows up when a trigger rises, and instead of reacting, you respond. It shows up when your old identity no longer fits, and instead of grieving, you smile. Because finally, the mask has fallen, and what's left is you. Let's return to the kingdom. Once divided, ruled by one function while the others rebelled, it now breathes as one. The tyrant has stepped down. The shadow general guards the gate. The four lords serve their roles, not their egos. And in the center of it all sits a presence, not anxious, not striving, not afraid. That presence is the self. This isn't perfection. Storms still come, doubts still whisper. But now you have inner alliances, inner strength, and most importantly, inner truth. Modern psychology calls this regulation. Jung called it individuation, but you'll know it simply as peace. Have you ever had a moment where nothing outside changed, but inside, everything did? Where you felt aligned, grounded, clear? Not because life was easy, but because you had finally come home. That's what happens when the divided kingdom unites. But there's still one final door to unlock. One final guide your psyche has been sending for years. Through whispers in the night, strange symbols, surreal scenes, your dreams. Because even when the kingdom is quiet, the dreams keep speaking. Chapter 12. The Whisper Behind the Mask. What your dreams are trying to tell you. When the world falls silent, your mind begins to speak, but not in words, not in logic, not in sentences. It speaks in shadows and symbols, in wolves with golden eyes, in endless staircases, in lovers with no faces. These are not random, these are not meaningless. They are messages, and dreams are the last language your soul still remembers. Jung knew this. He believed that dreams are not just mental noise. They are the psyche's secret telegrams. Every dream is a puzzle piece, a flash of forgotten light, a direct letter from the unconscious. But most people ignore them, or worse, dismiss them, because the language is too strange, too wild, too unfamiliar. But what if the reason your healing stalls is because you stopped listening? Dreams are your mind's mirror, showing you what your waking self refuses to see. The parts of you you're ignoring, the truths you're too afraid to face, and the next steps you're too timid to take. It's all there, in code. Let me tell you a story. A woman dreams she's in a flooded library. Books float past. A child screams in the attic. She wakes up shaken. Her analyst asks, "What have you been avoiding learning?" She realizes she's been suppressing her intuition, overanalyzing everything, ignoring her inner child. The flood was not chaos, it was cleansing. Dreams bypass the tyranny of your dominant function. They don't care about your logic or your emotional rules. They come from the deeper kingdom, the one beneath the throne room. And sometimes, they bring visions that shake your reality. Think about your own dreams. Have you ever had one so vivid it haunted you for days? Or one that made no sense but felt true? That's not nonsense. That's the whisper behind the mask. In 2025, neuroscience is starting to catch up. We now know dreams integrate memory, emotion, conflict. But Jung knew it before the scans, because the psyche has always spoken this way, since before language, before civilization. Dreams show you what's next before your conscious mind is ready. They reveal the shadow, the potential, the fear, the purpose. They don't lie, but they don't shout, they whisper. To understand your dreams is to hold the final key to your own divided kingdom. Because even when your mind is silent, your soul never stops sending signals. And once you begin decoding these messages, you'll realize the story of your psyche was never linear. It was a spiral, a myth, a journey. And now you've returned with a map. But maps mean nothing if we don't use them. Conclusion. The kingdom awaits your return. 12 doors have opened. 12 parts of you have spoken. From the Exiled Twin to the Shadow General. From the Tyrant Function to the Whispering Dream. This was not just a psychological map. It was a myth. Your myth. You've seen how your strength became your cage. How your shadow held a gift. How the people you judged were actually reflections of your buried self. You now know the secret war within, between the four lords of your psyche, and the cost of letting one rule unchecked. You've seen how society shapes, shames, and silences, and you've felt the echo of the rebel inside. But more than that, you've seen the way home. Integration isn't about fixing, it's about facing. It's about becoming the sovereign of your own inner kingdom, not by dominance, but by counsel. Not by exile, but by return. So I ask you now, which function have you crowned? Which one have you ignored? And what would happen if you invited them all to the table? Which chapter struck the deepest chord in you? Which part of your psyche spoke loudest? This is not a solo journey. This is a renaissance, a return to wholeness. And if this message found you at the right moment, maybe it's because a part of you already knew, already remembered. Until then, remember, you were never broken, just divided. Now, unite.